Jalen Brunson has been ruled out of Game 7 with a broken left hand on an injury that I think occurred on this play. And in this video, we're going to take a look at what exactly likely happened here and how it could affect things if the Knicks are able to pull off a comeback of the ages. Welcome back, everybody. I'm Dr. Brian Sutterer, and my goal on this channel is to teach you about the medical side of the sports world. Now, I don't think we've had a team that we've had more injuries to discuss and talk about in a regular or postseason here than the New York Knicks. Just horrific luck. I'm recording this video with about 6 minutes left in the fourth quarter. The Knicks still have a chance here, but if they are able to pull this off, they very likely are going to be without Brunson for potentially the rest of the playoffs, even if they are able to pull this out against Indiana. Now, the word that we've gotten from Brunson is that it is a left hand fracture. And of course, hand is very generic. That implies a lot of different things, including the metacarpals, the fingers, the thumb. My concern would be that it might actually be more of a thumb fracture for Brunson, just based on where it looked like he grabbed and what was going on the play. So this was the play where I think it occurred. We see Brunson trying to play defense here, and his left hand and thumb sort of get awkwardly stuck and bent upwards here underneath the right arm of the Pacers player as they're driving in. And if we look at the end of this whole sequence, this is right when Brunson went down, and we can see him grabbing at that left hand. It looks like he's grabbing onto his left thumb. And this, of course, was when we ultimately saw him motion right after this play to be subbed out. So I think this is the play where this injury occurred, because we didn't see him come back afterwards. Clearly seems to be in some distress, grabbing at that left thumb. And so my concern is that this would be a thumb fracture, potentially, just looking where he's grabbing and the mechanism. There was no fall, which would make something like a wrist injury less likely. That's typically something we get with a fall. So I think we're dealing with either a fracture of one of the fingers or specifically the thumb. Now, interestingly, Brunson has been playing with some tape on that left thumb, suggesting he's actually been playing through an injury, which might have played a role in this subsequent fracture. And we'll talk about why, review some of the anatomy, but first I want to give a quick shout out to the sponsor of this video. Today's video is sponsored by Hungryroot. Hungryroot is so much more than just your average meal prep service. It's the easiest way to get simple, healthy, personalized recipes delivered to your door, and also groceries and snacks. To get started, you take a fun short quiz that helps Hungryroot understand your own individual meal and diet preferences. They'll walk you through your diet and eating goals, whether or not you have any specific dietary restrictions, and if you're following things like an anti-inflammatory diet, or maybe you're trying to personally get more protein in your diet like I am. Everything then gets delivered conveniently straight to your front door. The recipes are simple, they're easy to follow, and the ingredients are definitely wife approved. Right now, the first 100 people to use my promo code BRIANMD40 are going to get 40% off their first order with Hungryroot. You can use the link in the description or scan the QR code here on the screen to get started. I'm able to take care of all of my groceries at once by having some meals that are planned out with easy, simple recipes to follow, but also having some basic essentials to stock up in the pantry and fill up those snacks. So save time by allowing Hungryroot to take care of your grocery shopping and meal planning for you. Once again, first 100 people are going to get 40% off with code BRIANMD40. Click the link down in the description below to get started today. Thank you again to Hungryroot for sponsoring today's video, and let's get back to our learning. So the taping that we see here on Brunson's left hand, he's having his thumb taped for support. And the classic reason why you would tape your thumb like this is if you're dealing with a ligament sprain, in specifically, most likely that MCP joint, where we see like quarterbacks get those UCL tears in their thumb. So this sort of a taping pattern that we saw on Brunson's left hand is suggestive that as a baseline, he's dealing with an injury to that left thumb. Like I said, probably a thumb sprain, and a sprain of that thumb is going to result in some instability, some weakness in that area. Now, it's not something that's unheard of to try and play through, but if this does in fact end up being a thumb fracture, there's evidence here that there could have been a previous injury there that made that thumb more susceptible to an injury that just finally became worse, or there was maybe already a little avulsion fracture there that he just simply couldn't continue to play through. And interestingly, we see tape all over Brunson's right hand as well. I mean, there you can see another little view of that left hand where we see that tape supporting that left thumb. And then as he comes through here, we can see how more the index finger is taped on this right hand. So this guy has clearly been dealing with more than just the foot injury. So next, if we look at our biodigital anatomy tool here, I've got the different bones of the hand highlighted. And when we talk about a hand fracture, of course, that could theoretically be anything from, the wrist outward. But typically a wrist fracture is going to occur when somebody falls on an outstretched hand, or as we call a foosh, fall on an outstretched hand. That landing on a hyperextended wrist putting force through the wrist, that's typically going to lead to a wrist fracture. So I don't think this is anything in the wrist bones. Now, these metacarpal bones, which are the long bones of the finger that sit within the palm, those injuries are going to occur usually from some type of direct load, like a boxer fracture of that fifth metatarsal if you punch something. So again, typically some sort of a load that goes in from the knuckles this way, putting force through those metacarpals and causing a fracture. But in the case of the thumb, what's interesting is you have those little ligaments that run on the outside and inside here of this little thumb metacarpal phalangeal joint. So there's a little ulnar collateral sided ligament right there, a radial collateral ligament right there that provides stability to that joint. And this is the type of injury that you would tape your thumb for if you had just a little bit of a sprain. Now, if you have a worsening injury there, you might get a break where that thumb gets pulled backwards or jammed backwards, kind of like what we see as Brunson's left arm went up under the Pacers player. That thumb can get hyper abducted, extended, and you can worsen a little sprain at that thumb UCL joint or potentially lead to an avulsion fracture. So that might be what's going on here. Of course, you could also think of a fracture to the base of the thumb. It is interesting to me that they don't call this just a finger, a thumb, a wrist. They're just being very general about hand. But again, I think potentially some we see with that existing tape, I would be worried about with the mechanism of a fracture to this thumb with maybe a UCL tear at that joint. So if we look back at that whole injury sequence one more time, we can see again, there was no real axial load on Brunson's hand. We see his fingers are on the other side there of the Pacers player. And then it looks like his thumb is probably getting caught back behind that arm, which is going to cause it to get jammed, hyperabduct, and I believe that's probably when this injury occurred, because again, after this play, we see Brunson grabbing, and it looks like he's grabbing at that thumb specifically. Evidence of taping there from before would raise concern about worsening of an injury, and so I suspect that that's when this fracture occurred. Now, if the Knicks are for some reason able to pull off this crazy comeback, looking down here at when I'm recording this, so 4 minutes left, they're down by 15, probably not. If they do, expect him to miss at least a handful of weeks here. Now, if this is a small little avulsion, just like a little flake, that might be something you could try and tape up and play through depending on where it is, but I think most likely this would be an injury that either is going to require a surgery and then have at least a 4 to 6 week recovery. And even if you don't do surgery, it's really hard to tape, to stabilize, to brace the dominant side of a basketball player to non-operatively treat a fracture, even if it's something that doesn't need a surgery. Now, this should not be anything that affects him going into next year. Could this be something that lingers into the Olympics timeframe? No, it shouldn't. That should be far enough out down the road. So I think even if the Knicks pull this off, we're probably dealing with an even longer absence for Brunson in the rest of the playoffs. The other thing too, I just want to mention, OG Anunoby, I guess you got to give him some credit for trying to go. He looked really terrible. I'm glad that they didn't try and put him back in this game to make that hamstring injury worse. I think it's reasonable in Game 7 to let a guy try and push, to try and get a little bit out there, see what he can do in that situation. But he looked very hampered, obviously, and was not able to do much. And so I'm glad that it doesn't seem like anything had an opportunity to get worse. He should heal up. He should just be fine going forward into the offseason and next year. So that's it for the video, everybody. Let me know as always any questions or comments down below. And until next time, we'll see you later. Bye.